Hi, my name's Simon Baker, the Executive Chairman of the Online Marketplaces Group. I recently interviewed Hari Krishnan from PropertyGuru in Southeast Asia. PropertyGuru has recently released some fantastic results that show strong growth of the business in 2019. We started off the conversation about the impact of the coronavirus on the Singapore and Southeast Asian markets.
Yeah, wow. Again, there were phases, right? I mean, for us, Singapore was very much in the first phase, right? I mean, as soon as China happened, Hong Kong and Singapore followed right after. And when you think about the real estate industry, there are two impacts that we had. I mean, around Chinese New Year, which was the end of January, so January, I mean, let's step back a second. When we came into the year, we knew January would be a washout because it was feeding into Chinese New Year. And so not too much activity traditionally happens in that period prior to CNY. And so, I think for most people, including the real estate sector, we just sort of said, okay, we'll do some minimal stuff, but mostly getting ready for February. That was the plan. And then late Jan and early Feb is when coronavirus showed up in Singapore. And
Yes.
there were two immediate consequences. The first one was the Chinese went into full lockdown, the mainland Chinese. And because of that, all the, if you think about luxury real estate in Singapore, the Chinese account for a fairly sizable, if I remember, 50 to 60% of the foreign buyers in luxury real estate in 2019 were Chinese. So those just disappeared. So all the new projects focused on foreign buyers or who needed a significant portion of foreign buyers got delayed, deferred, what have you. The other consequence is Chinese developers have started building in Singapore and in other markets. And those projects started getting delayed because a lot of their senior and mid management was stuck in China. They couldn't fly into Singapore. And so they got delayed. And then obviously it took them a significant period of time to sort of get organized to figure out whether local partners could step in their stead, etc. But net, you saw that February suddenly became very weak for primary real estate. Now, what you did see is secondary real estate picked up post CNY. And actually at the end of Q1, what you saw in Singapore was transaction volumes were fine. And actually for us, we basically hit our budget for Q1 for the group, but definitely for Singapore as well. And so I think it was sort of a delayed impact in that sense. But then as the domestic population started falling ill and lockdowns started coming in, then obviously real estate sector has completely slowed down. So I'd say the major slowdown has been April, because in April, Vietnam, then Malaysia, and then finally Singapore all went into full lockdown. So no construction activity, no show suites allowed to operate. And therefore the physical parts of real estate have come to a halt. You can't do visits even for resale. If you're an agent with a listing, you are seeing listing volumes drop by 10, 15% because there's no one can visit a site. So, so there's no point actually maintaining that. So you're seeing, I haven't parsed through all the data, but in preparation for our conversation, I did look at some of it. You are seeing that in some of the slightly more mid to upper end real estate, the listings remain reasonably stable because they assume it'll be a longer research process anyway. But the government housing, the slightly more affordable, where I think the sales cycle is much shorter, you are seeing listing volumes come off.
And has the demand side also dropped? So less leads being generated because people are maybe sitting back, waiting to see what happens to prices?
So you're definitely seeing that in April. So I think, again, leading into March, actually zero impact. On demand side, actually looked completely fine. So there was no, supply started coming off a little bit, but demand was just completely flat. I mean, it was completely in a good place. April, you're seeing traffic, leads, volumes all coming down. It varies market by market. But Singapore about 10%, 10-15%. What's been interesting though is the corollary to this is Vietnam relaxed their lockdown last Friday, so this past Friday, and almost immediately you saw things climb back up. So we do a pay-as-you-go model in Vietnam, so it's not annual subscriptions. Now the disadvantage of that is that it immediately falls off a cliff when it stops. But the advantage obviously is it comes flying out the blocks as soon as it comes back on. And so we saw it sort of recovered to about 90% of what the numbers. Now let's this week play out. I think it's too early to call it a win. Also, let's pray for them that they do not have second and third phase sort of breakouts of the disease. But assuming that the early indication was definitely that the demand is there, and actually the supply is there as well, because the cash sales, obviously the supply side of things. So lead volumes came back, everything in Vietnam, everything came back. In Singapore and Malaysia, etc., we're locked down all the way through May. So we're still, I don't know, 30 days away from a full recovery.
What are some of the things that you've done? I noticed you have this PropertyGuru Academy. What is that?
Yeah. So I think, see, you have to remember, in our part of the world, the offline to online migration is still ongoing. So even new agents to come in, you'll be surprised to hear that many of them still, till date, there is more money spent on the newspaper, even in Singapore, than on PropertyGuru. And in Singapore, we have 70% market share. We've been here 13 years, pretty much a household name. And we still, I would say the newspaper gets more dollars than us, right? I mean, so the offline to online is not like Australia or any of the developed countries. And so as a developed country, it's quite surprising to see Singapore not quite all the way there. So I think the reality is the agents come on and they immediately they will do direct mailers. So I still get flyers in my mailbox. You'll still see advertisements in the newspaper. And yes, I'd say most of them will also start with our entry-level sort of new agent packages, etc. We do have a sort of a tier which is meant for a new agent. But what we realize is we also need to train them on what are the benefits. And in the last 3 or 4 years in particular, I think we may have talked about it at your event in Bangkok as well. We spent a lot of time on analytics, things which are, I'd say, very much sort of table stakes in a developed economy. The reality is here, because unlike in the US, there are no MLSs, none of the data is standardized. We are effectively, it's all proprietary data. So we are having to generate the data ourselves. But now, because we have, like in markets like Singapore and Vietnam, and to some degree Thailand, we have sufficient data to, to sort of make these assertions. We're able to tell them, for example, what's a high demand and low supply district in Singapore. So where should you go to procure listings? Or where is a very high demand, high supply district. So it's very competitive. So you need to think about, if you really want to play here, you may want to think about premium products. So we don't use it all to push product, but it's more insight. And so I think the Academy is very much about learning about how to use digital solutions. And it's not just about PropertyGuru. It's also just getting a lay of the land. What is search, social, CPM, CPC, so for someone who's not a digital native, they may be digitally native as a consumer, meaning consuming these products like Google and such, but they don't know how to act as a digital advertiser. So it's very much about digital training.
And this academy, is that Singapore only, or is it throughout Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam?
So we do it in all our 5 markets. It's localized. So we do it in Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia. The frequency varies. So I think in some of those markets it's even more basic. In Singapore, we're getting more advanced with some of our programs. But I think in particularly markets like Indonesia, it's very, very basic stuff, honestly. It could be as much as, how should you take a good photograph? How do you think about what's the benefit of, or rather, it's a stick and carrot approach, but it's definitely much more of a gentle approach around do not put up fake listings. If you have a stale listing, take it down. What's the benefit to you to take down a stale listing, and why bait and switch? And those kind of practices are very much still rife in our part of the world. I think we have, because of AI, etc., we have some triggers. So we're able to actually send them triggers saying we think this is a fake listing or whatever. But these academies are where we actually do it in person and say, hey, this is the reason we do that, and why it's not in your interest to do it, and how you lose credibility with the end consumer. We can sort of put out there.
Can you tell me about these awards that you run?
So these awards are in about 15 markets across Asia. So we actually have it in every market in Southeast Asia, but also in China, in Japan, Sri Lanka, Mongolia. And I think this year, I don't know if you're still doing it, but this year we were planning to enter Australia and India. Now, it is entirely focused on primary real estate. The way it works is developers enter under construction projects for consideration. There's a neutral jury of who we recruit. who are urban planners, architects, designers, local experts in each of those markets.
Yes.
And they adjudicate. There's a process which involves looking at submitted material. They actually do site visits. It's a requirement that they'll go to the site and they'll look at what's happening. They'll look at everything from, what's the technology being used on site. So in past years, certain categories, we've given awards for people who are using AR helmets at construction sites. And, so we've, it's not a theoretical exercise then. People begin to get celebrated for that. Anyway, so we then, depending on the market, so our largest awards are in Thailand. They're the oldest ones. That's where it started out. But you also have large awards across, particularly our core markets in Southeast Asia. Now you'd have, somewhere between, let's say 20 to 50 categories of awards. And what happens then is the award results are actually audited. So BDO comes in and audits it. So the idea here is the largest advertiser on PropertyGuru may not win. And that is a sticky point for our sales teams. But the commercial arrangement is, if you win, you buy an award marketing package from us, which involves media. We do have very limited print, but a lot of digital inventory that we make available, but also then it's showcased on your project listings, etc., on the platform. So it helps. And you get the right to use the likeness of that award in any form of advertising. So you'll see newspapers and outdoor in Singapore and Vietnam, etc., with our award trophies all over. And I think obviously then you have this big gala dinner, tuxedos and such. And I think the benefit of that is really, when you're dealing with these developers, they're all family businesses. So if you're talking to the patriarch and their sons and daughters, it's actually quite hard to have a conversation like this, or in a boardroom, talk to them about sales process automation or performance marketing, what have you. But if you get them into a black tie dinner, they will show up. These billionaires and their kids will, and I shouldn't call them kids, but the next generation will show up, and they will sit there for 3 or 4 hours, essentially under our big top, and listen to their peers talk about things, but they'll also listen to us. And we have a sales process automation software. They'll hear about Fastkey. They'll hear about what's the latest things that are happening there. And we found it very useful for them to understand digital without it being a sales pitch. It becomes much more of an organic growth. And I mean, just in the last couple of years, last year I was at the Malaysia Awards, and I had a developer who sort of leaned over. I've been sitting next to him as a senior gentleman in Malaysia. And he sort of leaned over and he said, "Do you know about our project in Penang?" And I said, "Well, actually, no, I'm not familiar." And we spent, 15 minutes talking about it. And then I sort of went over to our country manager and I said, "Hey, do you know about this Penang project?" And long story short, no one had heard of it. It wasn't something that gone out and talked to anyone about. So we started getting access to this. So he wanted to know whether we had data for him to plan his project better. So we did a bespoke activity there where we sort of pulled some data and gave them a sense of what's the kind of demand. So, this gives us there is no core logic. There's none of this stuff here. So developers are working with old-fashioned offline market research. So, these are some of the potential areas that we are exploring. I mean, this disease has definitely set us back a little bit in terms of our ambitions, but I think you will definitely see us get much more aggressive with our data ambitions in the next, let's call it 18 to 24 months.
Okay. So when we look at the crisis that we're currently in, what opportunities are being created by it for your business?
So I think the biggest one is on the developer side. I think the developers were able to fast track behavioral change when it comes to use of particularly our sales process automation software. So Fastkey has always been part of our suite, but in some markets, they prefer to buy our display advertising. Awards actually does extremely well, so that's quite easy to sell. But Fastkey, it varies. I mean, I'd say the guys who are technologically savvy in Thailand or in Malaysia and Singapore in particular, they have been early adopters. Pretty much every developer in Singapore uses Fastkey as their CRM. But we've started bringing in new modules to it. So you have a CRM, you have a booking engine. You don't have to buy all these modules. Like a software, you buy which module you want. And then there are specific things like there's a balloting system that runs only in Singapore. It's a unique thing. So we custom built it for Singapore. So you can run digital ballots and all that. But what's been accelerated is a module which is more of a, sort of a thing we said, okay, it should logically be useful, but I'm not sure whether the customer's ready for it. And that is very much about remote viewing and remote buying. And this has forced that change. So suddenly that's become the hero product. And so there we partnered with a sort of a third-party provider. It's an exclusive partnership. And what happens there is essentially last week, for example, we did a call for a developer, and there were 300 or 400 customers who sort of logged in to check out this remote viewing. And so let me sort of explain. There are two parts. One is a remote viewing solution where you have visualizations of the township, the building itself. Then through our software, we can show real-time inventory availability. You can click through, and in that, let's say you're looking at the 20th story unit, we'll show you the floor plan and the walkthrough and all that stuff. And at its extreme, we also have the ability to put a booking engine in there. So you can put in a token down payment, maybe a few $1,000s, not the full 10% or 15%, but you put down a few $1,000s, you buy yourself, let's say 10 days, but at least that unit is yours. And it flows straight through to the ERP. So which are the developer ends. The developer is able to see the sort of soup to nuts solution of marketing all the way through to sale. And we're definitely seeing that front end getting a lot of traction. The pipeline is very strong. In conjunction with this, they're beginning to also explore another thing, which simply did not exist pre-COVID, and that is live streaming. So we sort of sped this up, and we have started live streaming, particularly into China. So we did this for Thailand. A year or so, no more than that, 18 months ago, we launched the agent marketplace component of this software, this Fastkey app. We launched a version of it in mainland China. And there, through a partnership, we started onboarding agents to start using this product. We are not interested in launching a B2C product in mainland China, but we said, perhaps we can go B2B2C. So Southeast Asian developer, Chinese agent, Chinese consumer. And particularly for Thailand and then Singapore, it becomes very useful because there's a lot of Chinese buyers. And now in a COVID situation, what we've started doing is we have added live streaming where the Southeast Asian developers can live stream to Chinese agents. So I mixed things, but when I meant the 300 to 400 people who dialed in last week were Chinese agents dialing into a live stream from a Malaysian developer. They could interact with them. There's chat, and it's much more than Zoom. It's another software which is prevalent in China, and it allows them to sort of do that training and onboarding, whatever. And then you have the Fastkey and the visualization software to actually drive bookings or availability and all of that. So I think this change of remote buying, use of software, all of that has definitely got accelerated. But I still, what I was just telling our board yesterday is I think we have another 6 months. I think even if we start coming out of this, I think we all realize we'll come out in phases, and unfortunately in some countries we'll go forward and then we'll have to take a step back because we'll have a second phase of illness or whatever. So in this 6 months, I think there's an opportunity to do this. The benefit is we've had the software for over 12 months. So it's a fully developed, bug-free. We've been pitching it for a while. So the customers are coming back to us and saying, hey, you talked to us 3 months ago about that software. Sort of remind me again what it does. And so the sales cycle for that has shortened. And then obviously things like display advertising, et cetera, has completely disappeared. I mean, no one's doing that at all. So we have shifted much more. The product mix has shifted more to software.
Okay. Now, as we come out of this coronavirus crisis, and you talked about this remote viewing, do you think that remote viewing will stay as a normal everyday operation, and the world has probably changed the way it operates? Do you think the crisis has pushed that further forward?
I definitely think so. I don't think in our sector, I don't think you will completely do away with site visits, but I think you will greatly increase the use of remote viewings and remote visits, particularly because we have intra-regional buyers. The largest buyers in Malaysia are Singaporeans. The largest buyers in Indonesia are Singaporeans. For many years, the largest buyers in Singapore were Indonesians. So, so you have a lot of these intra-regional things where we have had presence, but we've not really leveraged it fully. But things like Fastkey, rather than going B2C, going B2B2C, and sort of digitizing that channel has definitely been our play. And I think we'll see elements of this happen. So if I am looking to buy real estate in Bangkok, you could totally see me, see a user like me potentially spending time on our platforms to do all their research, shortlist, do all of that remotely. And then obviously hop on a plane, go to Bangkok and do the site visit for maybe a couple of units and complete the transaction.
So it really is a funneling tool. So historically, you might have gone to Bangkok to see 10 or 20 units in the space of a week. Now it's go for a day, see 2 or 3 that you've shortlisted, and then depending on location, etc., deals done, deposits made, away you go.
Yeah, and I think that's the benefit for the consumer, and for the developer, obviously, is the analytics. They begin to understand where are they getting the demand, what's the kind of buyer, what's the profile, am I building the right stuff, is my marketing message correct? Meaning, if I was trying to target Simon, but I got Hari, and assuming we're very different people, what's different in the marketing? Did I just get it wrong, or am I attracting a different audience? So I think this is also, in a world where core logic, etc., do not exist. There is, I mean, you'll be shocked. And I think it's another thing we should talk about is just this whole thing of financing, which is another opportunity which we've really got started on. But there is no refinancing market. There are no AVMs. There is no data. So if you look at the data space for the large players, meaning developers and banks, they do not exist. So, I mean, what's the opportunity to create that and develop that? I think it's immense. So I think you will see some of the behavior definitely driven by the demand side of things. But I think once the developers really get under the hood and see what they can achieve with this, you'll see supply pushing it more and more.
Okay. And how do you think is the best way to get into the finance side?
So I think, we obviously launched a mortgage marketplace in Singapore. It's called PropertyGuru Finance. We launched it. We'd already announced that we'd launch it. We sort of soft launched it last year. We fully launched it just prior to COVID, so early February. And it's Singapore only for now. Now, you have to remember, even till date in Singapore, there's no equivalent of a Lendy, for example. No one is digitizing loan origination. The comparison marketplaces that exist do not have deep integrations into the banks, so they're just lead forms. So I unfortunately had to refinance my home about 18 months ago. And I used one of these other platforms in Singapore. Very good for other things. I've used them for car insurance, etc. Extremely good. Exactly what you'd expect to see, fully digital. I was very happy. So I went back to refinance my home, and they were just lead forms. So I would fill the form, and it would go through, let's say, 3 banks. And then, and by the way, one of them was my own bank. And it would go in, and those banks would then call me up and make me fill up more, and very often fill up physical forms. So this is loan origination. This is before the credit check and everything. So there's a huge opportunity. So we have worked with some of the large banks in Singapore, signed exclusives with a few of them to co-develop plans for over the next, and because they need to be ready at their end too. Regulation is moving pretty quick. Singapore's trying to become, the fintech capital of the world. So there's a lot of quick movement from the government, which you'd expect out of Singapore. And so we are moving forward to try and think about this end-to-end digital mortgage app, not just application, but mortgage sort of sale. I think there'll be still some things which require you to go to a lawyer at the loan fulfillment end of things. But I think you could potentially get even further along than loan origination. But we're sort of starting down that path. But I think the key thing is you need to have the demand. It's not different from anywhere in the world, Simon. You need people who are thinking about that, who are in that context. And I think the unique opportunity of COVID has been, we have taken this product and pivoted it towards refinancing. So we have said, hey, listen, you need to look at your household cash flow. So why don't you look at that and find ways to save your cash flow? We've now reached out to a number of corporations, a number of companies essentially, and gone corporate. And we've essentially said, reached out to the HR teams, etc., and said, would you like to offer this as a service to your Singaporean employees, where essentially Singapore-based employees rather, if they own a home, they can have a free consultation with our team. We actually have a sales team. We will do a credit check, all that stuff for you. And then potentially you could end up saving money. And so this product rolled out maybe 30 days ago, and we've already got, I want to say like a dozen companies. It's probably a little bit more by now, who are pushing this to their employee base. So, and then obviously we have our own direct B2C approach on PropertyGuru Singapore, where we're talking about refinancing. Now, I think in a post-COVID world, we'll talk about refinancing and new mortgages, obviously, because you'll have new sales start again. But I think the refinancing market does not exist. And again, this is one thing which in a post-COVID world, I think the refinancing market will start to exist and will start moving forward.
Okay. The other question I had was, do you involve yourself in the transaction at all, capturing any of the commission across any of these countries?
So we have tried that in Thailand and Malaysia, not in Singapore. I think in Thailand and Malaysia, there are some unique aspects to it. I think in Thailand, the agent has a different role than in most other countries. When you look domestically, Thai consumers are very comfortable going straight to the developer.
Mm-hmm.
The developers, in many cases, have large in-house sales teams, so they do not work with agencies. So I think that's a market structure which is very different from like even Singapore or Vietnam. And so in these markets, we have piloted essentially everything from all the way through to. So initially we would do CPL deals, would be highly qualified leads, which we would make available to their in-house sales team, who's obviously a salaried staff. And so the developer saves money because the commission rates are lower for in-house sales teams.
Yes.
And we essentially tap into that commission pool for that CPL deal because they are not financing it from marketing. They're financing it from the savings they make from the spread essentially of using us instead of an external agency. So we've done that. We did it with a very large developer in Kuala Lumpur as well, in Malaysia. And in that case, they gave us 100% digital marketing. So the deal there was, you will not spend any money on search or social yourself. You will give it all to us. It's our job to go out and generate all the digital leads, qualify them, and then give them to your sales team. And again, there we pulled both from their marketing budget, but also because they said, listen, if you're going to take all our digital, you need to do some brand as well. So essentially you become like an external media agency. But that's not the business we wanted to be in. But we said, as part of this turnkey solution, we're happy to do that too. But the benefit there was we got 100% of their digital budget. It's a large developer, KL Central, and they were spending nothing on Google or anyone else without going through PropertyGuru. So we were driving all of this. And the benefit to them was we underwrote the volume of leads as well as the cost per lead. And we were able to back that out because we do enough, obviously, of media buying, etc., to understand, what are the economics that make sense for us. Now, we've had some of our competitors try and do similar things and try and undercut us. But I think the interesting thing there is you also begin to understand some people do not have that data because they are pitching at places where the economics make no sense. So you will never, on a lead, at a lead level, you're losing money. So there's no way you're going to be able to build a business that way. So I think we've seen developers, we launched this initially in 2018. In 2019, we saw some of these competitive offerings come out. And then we've had at least, I'd say more than 50% of those developers who tried our competitor come back to us. Essentially, because the competitor doesn't know their data, they also don't know how to qualify the lead. For us, I think our strength has been the work we did in 2016 and 17, where we put in our data stack, scrubbed our data. I remember one of the big debates we had inside the company. I had come in from the outside. I came in from LinkedIn. And I think for me, the big thing was before you start building products based on data, you've got to have data standardization, you've got to have data governance, you've got to have all this sort of hygiene elements. And unfortunately, that is not sexy, it's not glamorous, but that's the sort of the foundations of a solid data business. And so 16 and 17, we did that. We were patient about it. And so by 18, even the first versions of our data analytics for our own team started becoming better and better. 19, we started shipping products using that data, exposing it to agents and to developers using FastKey. And I think this year you're going to see a lot more data come out because now our data is really good.
It sounds like you have a broad range of products, everything from the academy to serve the agents and really education training, the awards business, which is certainly very attractive for people to aspire, and it gives you great coverage across, especially markets you don't even operate in, at least from a portal side or another business. You seem to have a very good range of products that are very much tailored around this remote showings. You talked about your FastKey product, and then clearly the work you're doing with in some of these businesses where you're actually becoming a digital agency for developers, and they're just saying, "Here's my spend, give me leads, so I can close." So it sounds like in the Southeast Asian markets where you operate, you have to be very innovative. But the coronavirus has created opportunity because the way we operate every day has changed. it's probably setting you up for a very good future. And you've just got a couple of months to get through in terms of a downturn in the advertising business.
Yeah, I think so. And I'd say some of those markets, to be honest, I think it'll be more than a couple of months. The advertising business will take a little bit of a hit. I think what's interesting is, I am a huge believer in focus, and what we've discussed sounds anything but focus. It sounds like we're doing a bunch of different things. And the reality is, the academies that you called out, for instance, are just within trade marketing. So those are initiatives that are driven by trade marketing. So they're not really products per se. They're part of the offering, if you like, cost of sale, if you like, is kind of the way I look at it. But I think when you look at a lot of our offerings, we try and standardize our technology stack. So the idea is the back end needs to be standardized. That's how you create leverage. That's how you create a financial profile. Because if you look back 13 years, when our founders started the business, we were a marketplace business. We're exactly like REA and Rightmove and everyone else, Scout24. Now, over time, we began to realize two problems. One is, outside of Singapore, the quality of data is simply not there. As a result of that, the trust is not there. And if you think about a marketplace, it's an efficiency driver. It's the most efficient way to connect supply and demand. But I like to talk about it in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. In markets like Australia and the US, etc., because there are either data streams or data standardized, the consumer and for that matter, the supply side, trust the data completely. Because there are ways to verify it and all of that. And therefore, because the effectiveness of the solution has been met, you can focus on just efficiency. And so you build these marketplace businesses, and at its extreme, you have profitability like Rightmove, or you have a long track record of success like REA or many of the others. Now, for our markets, we began to realize that effectiveness is not met. People do not trust the data, they don't trust the thing. And as a result of this, if efficiency is putting the cart before the horse. You can't put a marketplace where demand doesn't know how to get to supply. I'll give an example. In Malaysia, people did not know how much they could afford. So they were going and putting in leads for houses which were way out of their budget. So we had to go and design the first credit check systems. We built a digital credit check business in 2019. It's just a free credit check, online credit check. But people begin to understand their affordability, and then we start flagging out the listings that are within their budget. So the quality of leads improve, the supply gets a benefit of that. But that's an example of us having to fix effectiveness before the marketplace itself works. And I think for us, when we look at the tech stack, it's the same tech stack. Vietnam is still getting integrated, but the other four have the same tech stack. And I'll give an example of maps. We use the same mapping technology everywhere, but the way we surface the data in a Thailand versus a Singapore is completely different. So we localize elements of it. The way we accept entries into our awards is a digital system. It's a CMS essentially, that's a simplified way of putting it. And that same CMS feeds into our platform as well. So if a developer wins an award, it's super easy for that to get piped straight through into our marketplaces. So I think the key things are all the non-glamorous sort of the work that the man behind the curtain is doing, putting that infrastructure in place. And in the front, it looks like we have built these localized solutions based on local needs. But the reason you do that, Simon, is yes, you could innovate and build all these solutions, but you will not build leverage, and you will not build a profitable business. And I think the greatest pride we had is in 2018, we turned profitable, operationally profitable, cash flow positive, increased that in 19. And 20, obviously, we'll take a step back because of the realities of it. But in 21, we'll return because the underlying business is profitable. And the only way to do that is by those investments, because we are seeing people try and copy us and innovate in certain areas. There's some interesting, startups doing some interesting things in places. But the reality is, if you don't have that back end, the data, that's the big lesson I learned from the big tech companies I worked in the past. You don't build that. That's the moat. That's what protects you from any sort of tiny innovative startup that comes after you.
Hari, fantastic stuff.